And is the Commonwealth ready to call their witness?
We are. First witness would be Austin Battcher.
And before you have a seat, could I have you to raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Do you want me to use the podium?
You may.
Thank you. Good. Thank you. Officer Battcher, for the record, would you state your name, please?
Austin Battcher,
And by whom are you employed?
Mount Washington Police Department.
How long have you been so employed?
Be 4 years this September.
All right. And prior to being employed by, or actually, when you first started being employed by the Mount Washington Police Department, did you undergo any training?
I did a 23-week academy at Richmond, Kentucky.
All right, so you went to the police academy at Eastern Kentucky?
That's correct.
Okay. And 23 weeks is approximately half a year, correct?
Correct.
All right. And during that time, you were employed by Mount Washington Police, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. During that training, what did the training entail?
Just kind of a basic knowledge of all different types of police work.
Okay. They taught you about what crimes there were, but did they teach you about traffic offenses and or anything like that?
They did.
Okay. And did they teach you how to use a radar gun and how to calibrate that radar gun?
They did not at the academy, but we do get certified through the police department after completing the academy.
So after the completion of the academy, they,
Objection leading, Judge.
I haven't asked the question yet.
That's right. Overruled.
After
Let
completing,
me stop y'all too. If I could have the attorney's approach. Usually on objections, if you all want to approach them, if you want to say objection and then come up and we can argue up here to where the jury doesn't necessarily have to hear them.
Sorry.
Okay, all right.
It's okay.
That's okay.
Thank
Thank you.
after completing the academy and going to work for the Mount Washington Police Department, what did they do in regards to training you on other things that have to do specifically with that department or have to do with police work?
Yearly we have CPR certification. Every year we do a radar LiDAR certification. It seems like we're doing some sort of training all the time.
All right, could you explain to the jury what radar LiDAR training is?
We have instructors that are members of the police department, and they put us through a course, and it certifies that you are able to calibrate your units at the beginning of every shift, and also that you know how they function and how to use them in order to observe people breaking the speed limit.
Do you have your own police car?
I do.
Does anyone else other than you use that car?
No, sir.
All right. And on on September the 15th of last year, 2018, what was your shift?
It would have started, this was after midnight, so it would have started on the 14th. I work 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay, so, all right, so you started at 6 o'clock on the 14th.
6 p.m.
And 6 p.m. and go through 6 a.m. on the 15th.
That's correct.
All right. On September 15th, approximately 12:30, could you tell the jury what you were doing?
Just a normal patrol through the city, checking neighborhoods, and just standard patrol.
Okay. And approximately 12:30, approximately 12:30 that night, you came in contact with a black Dodge Ram pickup truck. Could you explain to the jury what happened?
While I was on patrol, I passed the black Dodge pickup truck on a road in Mount Washington that is called Parkview Avenue. I could tell just from seeing him coming at me that he was going significantly fast. I checked the radar unit in my car, which showed him doing 51 miles per hour, and the posted speed limit is 25.
All right. When had that radar unit been calibrated before this time?
At 6 p.m. when I started my shift.
So right on the beginning of your shift?
That's correct.
All right. And how did you calibrate?
Each unit comes with a set of tuning forks that stay inside the vehicle, and I check both the front and the back at the beginning of every shift.
Okay, and that day you did that, is that correct?
That is correct.
And how did it calibrate?
It calibrated within the limit.
Okay. Now, you were headed, on which direction were you headed? Were you on Parkview, correct?
Parkview, correct.
And which direction were you headed on Parkview?
Parkview, I would be headed eastbound,
Okay, and he was headed,
westbound.
all right. Now, we later learned is Edward Hall, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And do you notice Edward Hall in this courtroom here today?
I do.
And could you identify him for the jury?
He's sitting right there.
Okay, and let the record reflect he did indicate the defendant. Thank you. Now, what did you do at that point? According to your radar, he's doing 51 in a 25-mile zone. What did you do?
So I immediately turn around and activate my overhead lights and my sirens, at which point in time he's coming up on an intersection, which is Parkview and Flat Lake Road, which then crosses over onto Wales Run. And he continued through that intersection, and then by the time I got through the intersection and caught up with him, he did stop on Wales Run.
All right. It was not a very long distance between where you initiated your emergency equipment and where he stopped, correct?
That's correct.
All right. What did you do at that point?
As I initiated my emergency equipment and caught up to him, I called out on the license plate that was on the vehicle and exited my patrol car. At which point in time that dispatch was trying to get a hold of me and ask me questions in regards to that vehicle, because they were trying to put out an attempt to locate on that same vehicle, same tag number, for a vehicle that was possibly intoxicated, that was all over the road, that was called in by a third party.
All right. And so when you called in to check on the license, what are you checking on when you're checking on that license plate?
Vehicle could be stolen, registered owners wanted, numerous things.
All right. None of that you just listed had anything to do with this. That's just one of the things you're checking when you call in the license plate, right?
That's correct.
All right. So, but when you did call in and check, dispatch had said they're looking for that same vehicle?
They had a call in regards to that vehicle, yes.
Okay. All right. What did you do at that point?
At that point in time, I made contact, the driver's side, and spoke to Mr. Hall, asked him for his license, registration, and insurance, which he was able to provide. Asked him if he knew why I was stopping him. He told me that he thought maybe he was speeding, but he wasn't really familiar with the area. And at that point in time, I could also smell the odor of alcoholic beverage coming from his breath as he was talking to me.
All right. Was there someone else in the vehicle?
He did have a passenger with him.
All right. And you said you smelled alcoholic beverage coming from the vehicle. Did it come from him or did it come from the other passenger?
I mean, it seemed to be coming from him because I was talking to him.
Okay. And you were on the driver's side? Correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And at which point did Officer Norris show up?
He pulled up as I was really walking up the very initial time. He was not very far away and pulled up behind me.
So his car was behind yours?
That's correct.
Okay. After Officer Norris got there, what did you do?
I took the subject's information that he had given me and went back to my patrol car just to run his driver's license information, the vehicle information, verify the insurance, and make sure that all that was good.
And all that came back fine?
It did.
All right. So the registration was valid, the insurance was valid, he had his driver's license, it was valid, it wasn't suspended or anything like that?
Correct.
Okay. And at that point, what happened?
While I was doing all that, Officer Norris made contact the driver's side because I told him that I could smell alcoholic beverage coming from within the car and from his breath. So Officer Norris went to double check and verify if he could also do the same.
All right. How long, well, I'll ask Officer Norris that. What did you do after that, after you told Officer Norris all that?
Like I said, at that point in time, I went back to my car, ran his information. Officer Norris went up, made contact. He got the subject out of the car to try to perform some tests. And at that one time, I just became a cover officer for Officer Norris while he did the test.
Okay. Approximately how long did that testing last?
A couple minutes maybe.
Okay, and then what happened?
At that point in time, after the tests were completed, Officer Norris placed him under arrest and he was taken back to Officer Norris's car.
What happened to the passenger?
The passenger, my sergeant, showed up while we were there. He gave the passenger a ride home because he had also been drinking, and I stayed there and waited for a tow truck to impound his vehicle.
Okay, how long did you wait for the tow truck?
I'm not sure. It depends. I'd say probably 15 minutes is about what it takes usually, 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, you did not transport Mr. Hall to the detention center?
No, sir.
All right, you stayed on the scene to secure the truck until a record came?
That's correct.
Okay. And what's your sergeant's name that gave the passenger a ride?
His name is Anthony Morris.
All right. And do you know the passenger's name?
I do not.
Okay. That passenger was not arrested though, was he?
He was not.
He was just taken to wherever he was going, whether home or somebody's house or someplace else?
Correct.
Okay. I have no further questions of this witness at this time.
Thank you. And Mr. Forman?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, officer.
Afternoon.
I want to kind of go back. We talked about your training briefly. You said you completed 23 weeks worth of training at Richmond,
That's correct.
and part of that training was DUI enforcement, was it not?
It was.
About 40 hours worth?
Correct.
By the, what is it called, NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration Standardized Field Sobriety Testing Course.
That's correct.
Are you familiar with that course?
I am.
When did you complete that course?
I'm sure it's in my training records. I don't remember the exact date. Some point in time during that 23 weeks.
Was it 5 years ago? 6 years ago? 10 years ago?
I graduated May 20th, so it would have been May 20th of 2016, so sometime before then.
So about 3.5 years ago, would that be a fair statement?
Something like that.
Okay. And in that training, you've learned there's a portion dedicated to cues that you're supposed to look for when you're looking for intoxicated drivers on the road, correct?
That's correct.
And one of those cues that you look for is weaving, correct?
That's correct.
Another cue you'd be looking for is if the vehicle is almost striking another object, right?
Correct.
Or another cue you'd be looking for is if the vehicle is taking a very sharp turn on a curve, right?
Yes.
You've indicated on your direct examination just moments ago that you saw Mr. Hall speeding, right?
That is correct.
And speeding is not one of those cues, right?
Not necessarily.
Of the 24 cues that you learned at your 40-hour training, which is in your manual, I don't know if you've refreshed your memory since then, but there are 24 cues. I just mentioned 3 of them for reference. You recall that speeding is not one of them, correct?
Correct.
He never accelerated or decelerated rapidly, did he?
Initially, when I turned around, I could see his vehicle accelerate as I was turning around on him.
He never turned with a wide radius at any point, did he?
No.
He never drove in the opposing lane?
Nope.
He never went down the wrong way on a one-way street?
Nope.
He never just stopped in the middle of the road for no reason? Without you initiating your equipment, of course?
Correct.
One of the most common indicators of an impaired driver is somebody who has failed to illuminate their headlamps. Are you aware of that?
I am.
His headlamps were illuminated, correct?
They were.
You never had to use your bullhorn to get his attention, did you?
Not the horn itself, no.
But you initiated your emergency lights, right?
I did.
And as you just indicated on direct examination, Mr. Hall reacted fairly quickly to those lights and pulled over, correct?
More or less.
And when he saw those lights, he pulled over in a safe and prompt manner.
Yes.
He had no problem steering the vehicle from your observations.
Correct.
He had full control of the brake pedal from your observation.
Correct.
Was there any other traffic on the road?
Not that I recall.
So his decisions and actions were consistent with somebody who is responding to your emergency lights to pull over on the side of the road after you initiated the traffic stop, right?
Yes.
He didn't abruptly swerve or anything?
No.
He didn't come to a sudden stop?
He stopped.
He stopped. He didn't strike a curb or any other object?
No, there's no curb there.
And you've been trained, officer, that a subject that will have, that when they're intoxicated, they will have alcohol in their brain, right? That will affect their muscles? You also indicated it was going 51 and a 25, right? That
That's
was
correct.
where you clocked them at?
Yes.
You've also stated that you calibrated the radar that you used on this day, correct?
Correct.
Did you bring any of that paperwork to show to the jury that you've calibrated this radar?
No.
But if they were to believe your testimony that he was going 26 miles over the limit, that requires really great acuity and attention to the road, right?
Correct.
Which would be difficult for an intoxicated person.
Correct. I mean, the road that he was on there is very straight, so not like he was on a very curvy road.
You also indicated that there was a third party who called in to dispatch with respect to Mr. Hall's vehicle, the Dodge pickup truck, right?
That's correct.
Did you bring that audio with you today?
I did not.
You did not have any body camera equipment on your person on that day, did you?
No, sir.
You did not have any video equipment in your vehicle either?
No, sir.
Are you in possession of video in the Sally port after you arrested Mr.
I didn't
Hall?
even go to the Sally port, so no.
You didn't go, where did you go?
I waited for the impound.
Oh,
the
I'm
vehicle.
sorry. My apologies. I forgot you were not the arresting officer. Okay. You have no equipment on your body and no equipment in the car for video recording purposes?
No.
No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong?
Just a couple to be direct, Judge. Officer Battcher, does any police officer for the Mount Washington Police Department have body cam?
No, sir.
Does any police officer for the Mount Washington Police Department have video cameras in their car?
No, sir.
All right, so the reason that you don't have that is because it's just not available to you all.
That is correct.
All right. And to your knowledge, is the 911 tape available today?
I'm sure it is. I don't know how long they keep the recordings at dispatch, but there is a recording of it.
Okay. It was recorded on that day.
Yeah, all incoming calls are recorded.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
No follow-up,
Mr.
Judge.
Farr. You can step down. Thank you.
May Officer Battcher be excused?
I have no objection, Judge.
All right.
He's got to be back at work 6 o'clock tonight. He's got a uniform he's got to get.
Okay, thank you, and you're excused.
Thank you.
And Mr.
Commonwealth would call Officer Ben Norris, please.
And before you have a seat, could I have you to raise your right hand?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Can I sit down?
Yes, you may.
And Officer, for the record, would you state your name, please?
Sir, Ben Norris.
And Officer Norris, by whom are you employed?
I work as a police officer in the city of Mount Washington.
Okay, and how long have you been so employed?
Over 3 years.
And did you ever work as a police officer anywhere before being employed by Mount Washington?
No, sir.
All right. You heard Officer Battcher testify about 23-week training at Eastern Kentucky. Did you go through the same training?
Yes.
Did you go through it at the same time he did or at some other time?
He graduated 5 months before I did.
Okay,
So in similar fashion, yes.
all right. Some of it was an overlap, some of it wasn't.
Correct.
All right. And during that training, were you trained on, well, what did the training involve?
As Officer Battcher stated, involved numerous procedures, as in driving, DUI detection, laws, etc. Just everything for everyday patrol.
Okay. Do you have your own police car?
Yes, sir.
Is there any other officer who uses that car?
No, sir, just me.
All right. And during the training that you underwent at Eastern Kentucky, did they teach you in DUI detection and, I guess, prevention?
Yes.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes, you may. Come on forward.
Your Honor, I believe the witness is chewing gum in court. I think that's really disrespectful to the jury. I would request that he remove his gum.
I noticed the same thing.
Okay.
I'm gonna have you approach the bench.
Yeah, please.
It's all right. Have a seat. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the last question I asked you is, did they teach you in DUI detection and prevention? I'm not sure if prevention actually works with it, but could you explain to the jury what that entails?
Yes, sir. It entails how to ID or identify subjects that are under the influence of alcohol. It goes through a 40-week course, as Officer Battcher had stated, to identify
40 hours.
40 hours, I
Yes.
apologize, 40 hours, not 40 weeks, to identify people that are under the influence of, again, alcohol, to actually bring individuals in that are students of Eastern Kentucky University that volunteer their time, that are over the age of 21, that have consumed alcoholic beverages, so that we can test them to see what it looks like for people to be impaired.
All right, and during that 40-hour course, obviously, you're not the only student there, right?
Correct.
Did you participate in any of those detection tests that they have with the students?
Yes.
And how are you graded on that?
You're graded on that depending on if you detect clues of people being impaired, which it goes into 3 different categories. As one of you've heard already, it's called horizontal gaze nystagmus. And what that is it's the involuntary jerking of the eyes. Nystagmus means the involuntary jerking of the eyes. And then also, that would be your first clue. Your second would be your one-leg stand and your walking turn that we learn. We get to see the students perform these tests to see if we can identify any clues of impairment. We have them go through, again, HGN, one-leg stand, and walking turn.
Okay, and is the aroma or the smell of alcohol included in this too?
Yes.
And all right, I'm going to call your attention to, and all this is done through NHTSA, right? NHTSA is the National Highway Traffic Safety Association, and they're the ones who provide a manual to you, or to provide a manual to the class about these tests. Is that correct?
Correct. NHTSA validates the test.
Okay. And so now I want to call your attention to the night of September, or the morning, early morning hours of September 15th, 2018, here in Bullitt County. Explain to the jury what your participation in this was.
Yes. After I arrived on scene, Officer Battcher, as he had stated, made me aware of what was going on. He stated that he could smell the aroma of an alcoholic beverage emitting from Mr. Hall's breath. So I went up there and talked to Mr. Hall. I asked if he had been drinking. He stated no, he had not been drinking. I asked if he would step out to perform some standardized field sobriety tests, which he agreed to. As he was exiting his vehicle, he was unsteady on his feet, couldn't keep his balance. He walked back to the back of his truck by where his tailgate is. Officer Battcher then stepped back out. I asked Officer Battcher if he could turn his overhead lights off in the front. so I could see his eyes while I performed these tests. I asked Mr. Hall to stand up straight with his arms down to his side and his head still. He did that. The first thing I did was check for equal pupil size. I do this because if an individual does not have equal pupil size, it could be some kind of neurological problem that's going on, brain tumor. Then we would want to call a ambulance there to check them out. Mr. Hall's pupils are normal. They're both the same size. The next thing I checked for was resting nystagmus. And what that is, ultimately, is if you're looking at somebody's eyes and they make a jerking, like flutter, when they're just looking straight forward, again, that could be a medical condition going on. You would want to call an ambulance to make sure that the individual is okay, have them go to the hospital. He did not have any jerkiness from resting nystagmus. And the next thing I checked was equal tracking. And why I do equal tracking is to make sure that the individual can do the tests that I am about to perform on him. So what I do is I take my stimulus, which my stimulus at this time was my finger. You can use an ink pen, you can use a pencil. I like using my finger just in case, I don't want anything to be dropped, potentially use a weapon. Not saying Mr. Hall would, but just for our own safety, I'll usually use my finger. I hold my finger about eye level, about eyebrow level, 12 to 15 inches away from Mr. Hall's face. And I ask him to follow my stimulus with his eyes and his eyes only, and I do not want him to move his head. I start with his left eye, and in a motion, I hold my stimulus 12 to 15 inches away from Mr. Hall's face, and it should take me about 2 seconds to go to Mr. Hall's left part of his face, and then back to center, and then the right part of his face where his eyes are tracking me. And I do this twice in each eye. And I do this to make sure that he can properly track my stimulus so I can go on to the HGN part of it. Mr. Hall's eyes tracked properly, and I went on to the next step, which is the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. The first test I administered, it was like a smooth pursuit. In similar fashion, it's just like equal tracking, 12 or 15 inches away from Mr. Hall's face, eyebrow level, and I start with his left eye. And it should take me approximately 2 seconds to go from his middle of his face to about his shoulder, and then back to the middle, and then the right part of his face. And what I'm doing is I'm checking for the involuntary jerking of the eyes. What this should look like in a non-impaired person, when I check for like a smooth pursuit, it should be like a marble in a glass. It should just roll with no stoppage, no involuntary jerking. Mr. Hall's eyes showed the involuntary jerking of the eyes as I checked his left and his right twice. The next thing I went on to was, it's called distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation. Again, what this is I hold my stimulus approximately 12 to 15 inches away from Mr. Hall's face. I start with his left eye, and max deviation means as I bring my stimulus over to the left part of his face, I don't want any of the white of the left part of his eye to show, and I hold it there for 4 seconds minimum to see if I see any of that involuntary jerking. And while I did that, I held it at max deviation, and I could see the involuntary jerking of the eyes. It was a flutter. I held it there for 4 seconds. I went back to the center of Mr. Hall's face, and then I went to the right part of the right side, and I checked for that distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation. And again, when I go to the right side, there should be no white of the eye showing, and you hold it there for a minimum of 4 seconds. And I've seen that involuntary jerking of the eyes. I do this twice in each eye. And the next thing I tried to perform was the onset prior to 45 degrees. But before I could get to that, Mr. Hall stated that he did not want to do any more tests. I said, okay, would you have any problem performing any balancing tests? He said, no, I don't want to do any balancing tests, so I did not move on to the walk and turn or one leg stand. At that time, as Mr. Hall was talking to me, again, I could smell the odor of an alcoholic beverage emitting from his breath. So based upon my training and experience for HGN, I placed him under arrest.
What did, at the academy, when you went through this training, what did the NHTSA tell you was the reason for giving this HGN test?
The reason giving these HGN tests is, once again, with the HGN, it's Nystagmus is the involuntary jerking of the eyes. This is validated by NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. A normal person who does not have any alcoholic beverage or drug, I should say, in their system, depending on what drug it is, will not have that involuntary jerking of the eyes. So if I was to test somebody who had not had any alcoholic beverages, they would not have that involuntary jerking of the eyes unless they had a medical condition, which there's a screening that we go through first, which I had explained, which he did not.
Okay. After he, all right, you asked him to do the one-leg stand, you asked him to do balancing tests, and he refused, is that
Correct.
correct? And what did you do at that point?
After he refused, I placed him under arrest. I walked him back to my car. I finished writing my citation, and then I transported him to Bullitt County Corrections.
Okay. During that transportation from Parkview and Flat Lick to the detention center, did he make any statements?
Yes, sir. He volunteered a statement stating that he knew he shouldn't have been speeding or driving reckless.
All right, did you ask him a question that
I
led
did
to
not.
that? All right, so he volunteered that statement.
Yes, sir.
All right. Once you got to the detention center, what happened at that point?
When we got to the detention center, I took Mr. Hall, I should say, out of my patrol vehicle, and I took him into the BA room, which they call it a BA room, it's called a blood alcohol room. It's a room to wait for the jailers to come out to get the inmate.
All right.
As we went in there, they had implied consent paper on the wall for all officers. They keep a stack of them. After I set him down, I told him I was going to read him in his implied consent. I told him if he had any questions about it, wait till I got done reading it to him. But by state law, I had to read the implied consent to him.
And did you do so?
Yes, sir.
And what happened at that point?
I read him his implied consent, and I requested a test for a blood draw, which he refused.
And then what happened?
Well, let me backtrack that. I asked him if he wanted an attorney first, which he had 10, but no more than 15 minutes to attempt to contact and communicate with an attorney. I do not recall if he wanted an attorney at that time. He may have. I can't recall. If he did, I'm sure he called. If he didn't, then we went on to the next thing, which I requested for a test of his blood.
Okay. And then he refused that?
Yes.
Okay. And then what did you do?
After that, the inmate, or the jailers came out to take Mr. Hall back. I had a signature at the bottom in the compliance consent where I signed off on it. I can't recall if Mr. Hall signed off on it or not.
Right. And do you know where that implied consent form is?
It should be with the file, I believe, because I staple all my implied consent, I give the jail copy, and then I take a copy back.
All right. And I do not have it in my file. Is there?
Okay.
Would it be in your file?
Potentially, it could be in our file at the
Where
police
is your
department.
file?
I did not bring my file with me.
Okay. All this occurred in Bullitt County, Kentucky?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize Mr. Hall here today?
Yes, sir, I do.
And could you identify him for the court?
He's sitting with a black vest and blue T-shirt on,
All
to the right of his
May the
attorney.
record reflect he did identify the defendant.
Yes, sir.
No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Forman.
Thank you, Judge. How you doing, officer?
Good, sir, how are you?
Good. How long has it been since you completed your DUI training?
Like I said, sir, I believe I completed it in October 2016.
So about the same time, almost 3 years?
Yes, sir. Identical to, like I said, Officer Battcher.
Mm-hmm. You wrote the citation in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
So let's talk about the events that transpired on September 15th, shall we? You have arrived on scene around 12:32 according to your citation. Does that sound
Correct.
fair?
Yes, sir.
And Officer Battcher was already on scene when you arrived.
Correct.
Officer Battcher has already made contact with the vehicle's driver,
Yes, sir.
which is Mr. Hall.
Yes.
And I don't believe you testified to that, but Officer Battcher did. He had a passenger in his car,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Did you talk with the passenger?
No, I did not.
Were you aware that the passenger was drinking?
At the time, no, but since then, yes.
And you were aware that he had an open container with him?
I don't recall.
When you write citations, part of your training at the academy was to make them complete,
Yes, sir.
accurate,
Yes, sir.
truthful,
Yes,
and that is because we're going to rely on it at some point, right?
yes,
A prosecutor is going to rely on it.
yes,
I would rely on it.
yes,
The judge would rely on it.
yes.
And the jury would rely on it, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you complete any supplemental reports other than the uniform citation in this case?
Just what I have.
So you have memorialized the events that have occurred in these 2 sheets of paper. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
You ever heard the phrase in your training, I believe, I'm not sure if I'm quoting it exactly, but remember, if you didn't write it in your report, it didn't happen. Do you remember
Yes.
that in the training?
Yes.
Why do they teach that?
They tell us to paint the bear in the academy. And ultimately, what that means is all the events that take place, if the officer can, to the best of his ability, will put it in their citation. Paints the bear. So,
So in your citation, you have noted the observations of Officer Battcher as well as your own, correct?
correct.
You stated that you also came into contact with the above subject at some point, correct?
Correct.
And you testified that you could smell an odor of alcohol coming from his breath and his vehicle, right?
That's correct.
And when you asked Mr. Hall if he had been drinking, he stated, "No, I have not."
Correct.
And you have no capitalized in your citation.
Correct.
Is it because he made an emphasis on it?
Yes. Usually when I use that, it's what the individual states. Like, no, I did not. That's what he stated.
Right, I'm asking you, why is the no capitalized? N-O, both letters are capitalized.
Oh, I don't recall, I'll be honest with you.
Would it be a fair statement that he probably made an emphasis on that no?
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, you wrote the citation, that's why I'm
I'm
asking.
well aware I wrote the citation.
Was it you who collected his, Mr. Hall's documents, the license, registration, proof of insurance?
No.
You've indicated in your citation that his eyes were bloodshot and glossy, right?
Correct.
You're aware that a very common indicator of impaired drivers is slurred speech, right?
Yes.
And he did not have any slurred speech.
No.
He did not have a red or flushed face, correct?
Correct.
Which is commonly accompanying bloodshot eyes, right?
Correct.
Because the alcohol expands the vessels in the blood, right? The blood
Correct.
begins to flow. So that was an incongruence, right?
Correct.
When you asked Mr. Hall out of the vehicle, you have stated that he was very unsteady on his feet and could not keep his balance, right?
Correct.
As you were administering the horizontal gaze nystagmus, he did not sway,
Correct.
he did not fall over,
No.
he did not throw up,
No, he did not throw up.
he didn't stumble,
No.
he didn't lose his balance as you were performing the HGN test?
Correct.
He was not leaning against his car?
Not that I can recall.
He was respectful when he spoke to you?
Yes.
He didn't swear
No.
or cuss you out?
No.
And you've already testified that you performed the horizontal gaze nystagmus test was the first test, right?
Before I performed the horizontal gaze nystagmus, I checked for the medical exemption of that, the pre, this equal pupil size, the resting nystagmus, and the equal tracking.
I'm sorry, I usually lump them together as part of, because I believe they're in the same chapter, the HGN chapter,
Yeah.
so in my head, they're kind of like
That's fine.
part of the HGN test. But I understand where you're coming from. So before you perform the actual looking for the clues, if you will, you found that he had equal pupil size, the pupils were equal, the size was equal, and the tracking was equal, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And you also checked for resting nystagmus,
Excuse me, yes.
right?
Yes, sir.
And if there was resting nystagmus, that could indicate potentially that a person is heavily under the influence,
Or it could be a medical problem.
or a medical problem.
Yes, sir.
With respect to alcohol, it would be somebody who's quite intoxicated.
Heavily intoxicated.
And then Mr. Hall did not have resting nystagmus.
No, sir, he didn't.
Do you recall Mr. Hall stating that he has an astigmatism?
No, sir.
Are you aware that nystagmus can occur for a variety of reasons other than alcohol and other than just a simple medical condition,
Yes.
like hypertension,
Yes,
high blood pressure?
correct. I also have taken a advanced class, ARID class for impairment, advanced roadside impaired driving enforcement, that indicates different types of nystagmus, drug-induced nystagmus, stuff like that.
So you've learned what type of nystagmus to look for.
Correct.
Are you an ophthalmologist, Officer Norris?
No, sir.
Are you an optometrist?
I'm no doctor at all, sir.
Not an eye doctor?
No, sir.
You don't have any medical training?
No, sir.
Nothing to do with the eye?
No, sir.
You're aware that nystagmus can occur naturally in a human being?
Yes, sir.
And after the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, you asked Mr. Hall to perform other tests which you refused to comply with, right?
Yes, sir. As stated before, I asked if you had any balancing problems. He stated no. I said, would you like to perform any balancing test? He said no.
At which point you placed him in handcuffs
Yes, sir.
and placed him in the back of your cruiser.
Yes, sir.
And he complied.
He complied.
He didn't offer any resistance.
None at all.
He didn't try to flee.
No, sir.
He was polite.
Yes.
Was very cooperative with you.
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
It's a fair statement.
You have an option to ask an individual to submit to a breath or blood test, right?
It's breath, blood, or urine. That's correct.
You did not ask for breath in this case.
I did not.
You gave him the implied consent form to sign, right?
Yes. Like stated earlier, I don't recall if he signed it or not, but yes.
So if you didn't sign it, you didn't do your job properly.
Well, there's a lot of people who refuse to sign it, so that's not technically right.
But you've indicated earlier that there is a copy somewhere in either the prosecution's file or your file, you just don't know where it is, right?
Yes, sir.
You did not have a body camera on you
No, sir.
on September 15th.
No, sir.
Did you have an in-car camera?
No, sir.
After you took him to the jail, did you secure any Sally Port video?
I did not.
Any jail booking video?
No, sir.
Any video at all?
No, sir.
Any audio recording?
No, sir.
So there's no video or audio recording with you that you brought to court with you today, as far as you know?
That's correct.
And from the entire conversation with Mr. Hall, I believe you testified on direct, you remember one statement, right?
Yes, sir.
I should not have been speeding or reckless driving.
That's right.
You don't remember anything else?
No, sir.
No further questions?
All right.
Just, Officer Norris, again, does any police officer on the Mount Washington Police Department have any body cam?
No, sir.
Does any police officer on the Mount Washington Police Department have video camera in their car?
No, sir, they do not.
All right. So that, and that's the reason you don't have any video?
That's correct.
All right. All right. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Forman, any other questions of this
No
witness?
follow-up, Your Honor.
All right. And you may step down.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. That is the Commonwealth's case.
All right, thank you.
If we may approach, Judge?
Yes, come forward, please.
I believe I need to make my motion for directed verdict, so I don't know if you want to excuse the jury or if you want me to make it right here, just rather than not over here.
I don't think that they can hear us they can't hear us with this going on, so we can just do it right here.
Okay.
Okay.
Judge, at this point, the defense would like to move for a directed verdict. I believe that the Commonwealth has not reached the only evidence they have provided is the testimony of two officers. Each of them have testified that they could smell odor of alcoholic beverage. It is not against the law to drive with odor coming from a person of alcohol from their breath. They do not have any field sobriety tests. They do not have a breath test. They do not have a blood test. Granted, this is a refusal, so the defense is not trying to discount that. The only evidence that they have provided is evidence of the horizontal gaze nystagmus and the fact that there was a smell of alcohol, and that's it. That is the entirety of the Commonwealth's case. So at this point, Your Honor, I think this case should be taken away from the jury and ruled on by the court as a direct verdict.
Judge, there's actually 3 charges here. There's speeding, 26 over, there's reckless
With
driving.
respect to the DUI, absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you. There's the reckless driving, speeding, and I think both of that's been testified to. As to the DUI, the Commonwealth has provided proof that both officers smelled alcohol coming from the breath, and both of them testified that came from the breath of the defendant. Officer Norris testified that he attempted to complete the HGN test and got 2/3 of the way through it. At least the way I understand it, he got about 2/3 of the way through it. And in that 2/3, he hit clues that it would indicate that the defendant was intoxicated. At that point, the defendant refused to do any further field sobriety tests and refused to do blood test at the jail, which under KRS 189A-105 sub 2A1, I think it is, can be used against him to indicate that he has violated 189A-010. I think the Commonwealth has at least gotten past the burden of proof for a directed verdict.
And I agree, I'm going to deny your motion at this time. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Judge.